Hello, we're going to be doing dual diagnosis intake today. My name is Katherine Mullins. I have been employed with PeerStar for about the past year and a half. I got my MBA from Walden University, my bachelor's in behavioral sciences from the Mount, and I have my associate's degree in depth studies from the Mount as well. I've been working in the field for the past 15 years in all types of capacities, but mainly focused on intellectual disabilities. Let's talk about what you would do if you got a new dual diagnosis peer. So we're going to walk through the process of your intake of a new peer. The first thing that I want to talk about is the script. So the new script that was sent out has a spot on it that asks if the person has an intellectual disability or developmental delay. This is for the doctors to write this information down. The doctors will not always fill this out completely or correctly, so while it is good information to have, it's not always 100% accurate. So we still want to be asking if the person has an intellectual disability or developmental delay. But if the script does have an intellectual disability or dual diagnosis listed, they will go into the program. If the script does not, still ask the question, so we're going to be going over that as well, how to ask the question. Later in this training, we're also going to go over diagnosis descriptions that you may see on the script that will mean that they should go into the dual diagnosis program. So, profile question. There's a question on the profile that asks if the person has an intellectual disability. That's a really hard question to ask sometimes, especially if the peer or the provider doesn't know what you mean. So if you have a provider on the phone, you usually can just say, does the person you support have an intellectual disability or developmental delay? Now, if they're in the mental health world or they're in the intellectual disability world, they should know what this means, so you usually shouldn't have to elaborate. If they're unsure though, if they're not sure what you mean, you can ask the below questions to them as well. So how to ask a peer or family member of a peer. Do you or does your family member have any challenges when it comes to learning information? Or did you or your family member need extra help in school with reading, writing, or comprehension? And then they might go into a little bit more detail of what that meant. Maybe they have a learning disability. That's totally okay. They would still go into the dual diagnosis program. So you're then going to click yes that they do have a dual diagnosis. So this is the workflow for dual diagnosis intake, and this has changed just a little bit. So this can actually be found in the X Drive under workflows for intake, but I'm not going to read all of it to you. What I am going to tell you is what has changed. The thing that has changed is what it's called for the DD intake. It is called Peer DD intake assessment. So whenever you're searching for that particular service, you want to make sure that you pick that one so that you can do the DD intake assessment with the peer on the phone or the provider. So this is where things have changed even more. The DD intake assessment changed a few months ago where we added more questions to kind of give myself as the director and other supervisors a little bit more information about the peer and helping you guys at the end assign which program that peer is going to go into. So the things that have changed, there are now yes or no questions at the top of the intake assessment, and so you're going to fill those out with the appropriate yes or no's or information, and we're going to go over that a little bit more closely on another slide. The other thing that has changed is we're not going to put them into dual diagnosis and dual diagnosis transition programs. They're going to go into one or the other, and we're going to go over that a little bit more in depth later in this training. Right after you click yes on the profile and you have completed the questions that you need to on the profile, you're going to go in and schedule and then begin service of the DD intake assessment. So I'm just showing you on the screen what it looks like in Credible, and that is the form that you're going to be looking for to complete after the profile is completed. And we want to do this when the peer or the peer's provider or peer's family member is actually on the phone. We don't want to hang up and then call later, just because you're going to have less success with this. And the peer doesn't have to answer these questions. These questions can be answered by anyone. And that's why, and you'll see on the next page, there are spots where you can put in who are answering the questions. So this is just a test example of what a DD intake assessment looks like. And you can see that there is a question, individual answering the questions. You can put peer here, you can put family member, you can put provider, whoever is on the phone with you at the time is fine to answer the questions. And then you're going to go through the yes and no questions. Is the peer going through a transition? And I picked yes, and then I put describe beside it. So moving out of his house or graduating school, getting a job for the first time, maybe their parents have died, something has changed in their life and they're going through a transition. Has the peer experienced any crisis situations recently? I put yes, and then I put in there, has been to the hospital or has called crisis. We want to know what level of crisis they're experiencing and maybe how often or the last time did they experience a crisis. Are all supports in favor of peer support? This is a yes or no. You don't have to put any explanation in there. This is just for our knowledge. Can this person actively participate with planning their goals? This is a yes or no question as well. Can the person actively participate with another person on their goals? Yes or no? And that, again, very simple. You don't have to describe anything after that. Now, I do want to talk about why these questions are in place. I want to know who's answering the questions because I want to get an idea of who is giving the information and who you've talked to on the phone and maybe the supports they already have in place. And then the transition question I want to know because if they're answering yes to this and no to crisis and then yes to the rest of the questions, they're going to go into the dual diagnosis transition program. And we're going to go over specifics on that on another slide, but I want to talk about it a couple times. So if they answer yes to a transition, no to crisis, yes to all supports in favor, yes to actively participating, and yes to actively participating with another person, they most likely will then qualify to go into the transition program. If you don't know what the transition program is, there is a training that you can go through with me. It is a 2-day training, 1 day online, 1 day in person. So let me know, email me, and I will give you the information so that we can move forward with that training. So this is the next section of the DD intake assessment. Is the person able to communicate? Yes or no question. Then you're going to get to 8 questions after that. Now these are a little bit unique. It is a scoring type of question. So you're going to ask the question, they're going to give you an explanation or tell you a little bit about it, or maybe even just a yes or no. You might have to ask additional questions to get more info. But you're going to kind of gauge what they're telling you and then score it 0 to 4. So it does have instructions here, and it says fill in the correct and appropriate numbers 0 to 4 for each activity. Complete all of the sections. If the person is not participating in that activity right now, please answer 0. If the activity is not applicable, please answer 0. At the end of each section, the scores will be tallied together. At the end of the assessments, the scores will be added together except for section 7 and 8. There will be a chart that explains what the scores mean. Now, we actually took the chart away. That's actually given to supervisors and regional director, and it's just kind of an idea of where that person lies and if they are going to be appropriate for peer support. So it just gives the supervisor and regional director more of an idea of the appropriateness for services and maybe the need for higher services, not ours. So the scores that you're going to be putting down here, 0, you're going to be putting down they don't need any assistance with this activity, or they're not actively participating in this activity, or it's not applicable to them. 1 would be that they need a little bit of assistance, but they're still able to do some things on their own. 2, 3, and 4 are then going to be levels higher than that. So 2, they need a little bit of assistance. They can do more activities on their own than 1. 3, they're able to do like maybe one thing, but mostly they need someone's help. 4, they cannot be independent without somebody's help. So community activities down below, you can see there are examples after the 8 questions that you can kind of grab ideas from. Like, are you able to use transportation on your own? Are you able to go out into the community? Are you able to go shopping and go to public places? You know, their answer is going to tell you whether or not they're going to be a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So let's use an example here. Let's say you're on the phone with the peer and you say, okay, we're going to be asking a couple questions about your ability to do the following activities. How are you with getting out into the community, using transportation, or going grocery shopping? They may tell you as their answer, I am independent on transportation, I don't do well with grocery shopping due to my anxiety, and I usually don't go out into the community unless someone takes me or I have somewhere to go. That's going to tell me that they can do a couple things on their own, but they're usually not doing it on their own and they need supports in place. So that's going to tell me a 2. And then you're just going to go through the next 7 after that and you're going to do the same thing. You know, you're going to ask the same questions and then you're going to kind of gauge where they would be on a 0 to 4 level. Now I do want to talk about 7 and 8. They are a little bit different. Medical activities and behavioral activities. If they score more than a 2 on either one of these, that's going to alert me as the director so that I know that they may need other services in place or they might already have other services in place, and just gives me an idea of, you know, how we can best support them. Now, number 8, if you score a 2 or 3 or 4, you're going to have to put in specifics. And the reason that I ask for specifics is because I want to know, are they verbally or physically aggressive? Do they have any other supports in place that help them with these behavioral activities, such as a behavioral specialist or service coordination, or, you know, maybe they go to anger management. And it kind of just makes me aware of the situation before going into the home, and also giving the CPS a little bit of a heads up that this might be a goal that they're going to work on. All right, so after you've completed the DD intake assessment, we're going to be talking about assignments. So I talked about this a little bit on another slide, but I want to go over it in more detail. So after completing the dual diagnosis intake assessment, you're going to be putting the peer in a specific program. If the peer answered the following, they will be going into peer support for dual diagnosis transition. Are you going through a transition with explanation? And that answer was yes. Are the family support networks in agreement? Yes. Have you experienced any crisis situations? No. Those are the questions that really are important to tell me whether or not they're going to go into the transition program. If the peer did not answer the above like that, they are going to go into peer support for dual diagnosis. Now, I do want to preference that only a small fraction of peers will actually go into the transition program. It is a smaller program that is specific, that has specific outcomes that need to be done in a timeline that some peers cannot do or don't need that service. They might just need peer support for dual diagnosis. So if you have any questions about which program to put them in, or if you haven't, you're not sure if they should or shouldn't go in that program, you can totally get a hold of me. Email me or call me and let me know the situation after you've talked to the peer, after the DD intake assessment is done. If you want me to look over the intake assessment and then kind of talk with you about what you think, I'm totally fine with that. And there's no wrong answer. You put them in the wrong program and we need to switch them, that's an easy fix. So the next part is assignment. Once you are done figuring out which program the peer goes into, you're going to follow the other intake workflows to assign the peer in the right program. However, after that, we do want to make sure that the initial IRP is listed under the correct program, and that the IRP form group should be scheduled for the initial IRP Hours worksheet will be scheduled for the supervisor, and then you're going to assign the CPS the DD or transition contact note. When assigning the peer to a CPS or supervisor, you must make sure that those employees are trained for the dual diagnosis program. So 2 ways. Their profile must reflect that they are trained with the dual diagnosis program, and there is also a form that we're going to be talking about that's under the X drive. So let's talk about trained CPSs. You'll need to make sure that the CPS and supervisor are completely trained to do the documentation with these individuals and are trained to support this population correctly. So 2 ways. You can check their profile. This is under full profile. There's a section that says dual diagnosis trained, and there's a yes or no answer. If they have a no there, stop right away. If you aren't sure, then you're going to go to step 2 if they were or were not trained. If yes, they can be assigned the peer. So just go ahead and assign them just like you would any other staff. So let's talk about no. Let's say they have a no checked in their profile and you're really not sure if they were trained or not trained. I want to urge you not to just take the CPS's word for this. They are getting confused on which trainings they have or have not been to. They are offered co-occurring, forensic, and dual diagnosis, as well as other trainings out in the community. So I don't want them to get confused and say, yes, I have been trained, and then we go off of that and we put them with the dual diagnosis peer, because that could be harmful to the documentation as well as how we support that peer. So the other way you can check is under the X drive to find the document. So under the X drive, you go in, you click on Altoona staff, then click dual diagnosis, and you open the document entitled Existing CPS DD Trained. And it's going to have a list, and it's going to be broken out into regions, and that's going to be where you're going to find if that peer or CPS has been trained. So just like CPS, supervisors need to be specifically trained in dual diagnosis programs in order to do the IRPs and the documentation and the supervision as well. So to check if the person has supervisor training in the dual diagnosis programs, you're going to go to that same document. You're going to go under the X drive, open that document, Existing CPS DD Trained, and they're going to have CPSS listed next to their name. That means they have been specifically trained for supervisor of DD programs. If you know of a supervisor that needs training, please let me know, and then I'm going to be talking with the regional directors of that region to make sure that that's okay, and then we're going to go into how to schedule that CPSS training with that supervisor. All right, let's talk about different diagnoses you may see whenever you're doing your intake. So here are a list of different diagnoses you may see. Now these are not the only ones, but these are the most common that are put on scripts or someone has talked about or said. I also put if they had a short version of it, because sometimes doctors will put like PWS or AST, and you may not know what that means. So here are a list of things you may see. If you have a question, if you get a script or someone says something on the phone and you're not sure, you can get a hold of me and ask, and I can tell you yes or no that would be somebody that would qualify to go into the dual diagnosis program. So issues or concerns. If you have questions, concerns, or issues, you can contact me anytime. I put my phone number and my email address on here so that you have access at any time to just say, hey, can you call me for a second, or I have a couple questions. And I am totally willing to do, whatever needs to happen. I want this program to work, and I want you guys to have, stress-free lives. So anything that I can do to help you is something that I'm willing to do. Just get a hold of me whenever you need it. Thank you for coming to my training.